Hello, and welcome to the Voice of South Coast Women, sponsored by the Bristol County Commission on the Status of Women. I'm your host, Gail from the YWCA Southeastern Massachusetts. Thank you for joining our show, and today's topic is immigration. So we have a great panel of guests for this exciting discussion. So we'll start off with if everyone can introduce themselves and say a little bit about what you do.
My name is Helena DaSilva Hughes, and I am the Executive Director of the Immigrants Assistance Center, and we are located in the south end of New Bedford at 58 Crapo Street in New Bedford. And as the Executive Director of the Immigrants Assistance Center, I've been working with the immigrant population for 32 years. And the mission of the center is to help immigrants overcome language, cultural, and economical barriers and help them integrate into the American way of life so they can become productive members of our community.
Great, thank you, Helena.
You're welcome.
Yes, my name is Raquel. I'm the president of Keefe Association New Bedford. Our mission is to preserve the culture and to educate the immigrants when they come to America. And also, we are located in New Bedford, 1157 Acushnet Avenue.
All right, thank you, Raquel.
My name is Fred Watt. I'm an immigration lawyer in private practice law in New Bedford, working mostly with the legal permanent resident community, either bringing them into the country on green cards or sometimes defending them in deportation proceedings.
Thank you.
And my name is Michelle Keefe. I'm a local attorney, and I'm here to represent the commission.
Well, thank you all again for joining us, and I'm going to hopefully have a lively discussion. We know that the topic of immigration can be a hot button issue, it can be controversial, we hear about it pretty much on a daily basis. So we really wanted to do this show to have some clarification about the differences, about immigration, who is here, who is not here, because we know that America is a country of immigrants. So it's really important, I think, for our viewers to understand the differences between a legal permanent resident and someone that's undocumented. So that's the main thing that I wanted to discuss and let our viewers know about. So maybe, Helena, we could start with you.
Sure. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I think what happens is immigration reform is such a hot topic, and you hear politicians use it, and even with our presidential election, they're using it as a political football. And unfortunately, this has been going on for a very long time. But I think what is important is for our community to understand that the difference between legal permanent residents. Well, legal permanent residents are green card holders. I remember when I immigrated in 1971, it was green. But it's not a green card anymore, but people still relate that as a green card. So the difference is that many times people who are legal permanent residents, green card holders, many times they get extremely upset because when we talk about immigrants in general, they are talking about the undocumented population and they're talking about people who are legal permanent residents in the same sentence. And what it's important for people to understand is that people who are legal permanent residents, again, green card holders, are people who are here legally in the United States and have a social security number. They're allowed to work. They have permission to be here, and really and they can actually become U.S. citizens. And the other population is the undocumented population is people who are here. They say there are about 12 million in the U.S. So in other words, 60% are coming through the border, but the other 40% are coming in either as visitors or students, and they're staying and they're undocumented. So that is important for people to understand. And what happens is that if you're a legal permanent resident, you can apply for citizenship, become a U.S. citizen, within the 5 years. Of course, they have to meet the language criteria and, of course, the good moral character before they apply. And the people who are here undocumented, there's no path for them to become legal permanent residents. At the moment, there isn't. And I think that is very important to talk about that, because you can't be here undocumented and all of a sudden say, I'm going to become a citizen. And I think you hear that. You hear that all the time, a path to legalization. No, a path to citizenship. And I'm like, it's not a path to citizenship. You need to be a path to legalization before you can become a U.S. citizen. And I think a lot of times when people don't understand the differences, people really get very upset. They say, oh, all these undocumented people now are going to become U.S. citizens. No. And that is something that is extremely important for people to understand. There is a huge difference, and let's not mix and let's not put into the same category as people who are here legal permanent residents. So there is a huge difference between the population, and it is very important for our population, our general population, to understand that. So let's, before we start talking about immigrants, let's make sure who you're talking about.
Sure.
And I think that's important.
No, I think that's an important point for us too, that we can't stress that, enough. Fred, in your work, I know that you do a lot of work with immigrants and going through this process. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, back to what Helena said, it's the subcategory that I work with are legal permanent resident aliens. And primarily what I've done over the last 20 years is work with them when they get into trouble with the law. Now they're being deported. And these folks, I would add that they have the right to become U.S. citizens, but they also have an awful lot of obligations as legal permanent residents. I've represented dozens, if not hundreds, of veterans, combat veterans from the United States military who have green cards. So they're one step away. They're an oath away from being U.S. citizens, and they don't do that for a variety of reasons. Many times it's because they just didn't know. And the folks who I represent didn't know. They did their time in the military, they did this, they did that, but they got into trouble.
Right.
Maybe when they're 20 years old. Maybe they had a fight in a bar room or something. 20 years later they change the law, and now they're automatically going to be deported. So those are the folks who I really principally focus on. But it's difficult when you're trying to discuss it, when you hear the politicians trying to discuss it. Are they illegal aliens? Are they undocumented immigrants?
right.
Each word has a precise meaning. Are they people who snuck over the border? Well, that's one group of rights. Are they people who came on a tourist visa and didn't leave on time? That's another group of rights. But it's frustrating sometimes as somebody who knows the issue to listen to whether it be the right or the left discuss the issue because they're all using the terminology to sway the argument in their direction. And the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Oh, thank you for that. So what is the correct terms that people were using? I know you listed a lot, like one of them that I don't like myself personally is alien. Like nobody is, from outer space. But we've heard that for many, many years,
Well, I mean, the correct term is alien.
Really?
That's
Okay.
the legally correct
That's the
term.
legal
They are
term.
aliens until such time as they naturalize and become U.S.
Okay.
citizens.
Yeah, that
They
is
can be
interesting.
lawful permanent resident aliens. They can be aliens who entered without inspection. They can be aliens on a F1 student visa or fiancé visas. They can, but the distinction legally is simply U.S. citizen or alien.
Alien. Oh, okay, interesting.
It's used as a pejorative,
Right.
but technically it is not.
Okay.
There isn't any such thing as an illegal alien. There is an undocumented alien. There's an overstayed alien. There's this kind of an alien and that kind of an alien. But and that's where I think the real pejorative is.
Okay. Okay.
So they're each one. I mean, when somebody comes to my office, the first question I ask is, "How did you get to the U.S.?" So,
Right.
That's how I'm going to categorize them as EWIs, entered without inspection, or something else, and then you subcategorize them as they go down to get the truly correct legal definition.
Okay. Now you mentioned, sometimes people coming in and they didn't know. Do you mean that they didn't know that they're not U.S. citizens, that they were not born here, or?
A lot of, one thing I see happening over and over again is back in the 70s and 80s, a mother could, when she naturalized,
Okay.
she could just list her kids, and her kids would pick up a naturalization. So many of these people believe that they're U.S. citizens.
Okay, all right. I wanted to clarify that so everyone
Exactly,
understands.
and that's
US
and
law.
that's a perfect example because we see that a lot. And
Yes.
so what happens is, so parents became U.S. citizens, and a lot of times, a lot of parents were becoming, a lot of legal permanent residents were becoming citizens, specifically, and I can use my parents as an example. So my dad came as a legal permanent resident then because his sister, who was a U.S. citizen, petitioned for my dad. But my dad waited about 11 years to do all the documentation before he was ready, before he got his visa to come into the U.S., and then he got his green card. Once he got here, he already had a job and he already had everything set up, but he came in as a legal permanent, but he waited 11 years before he got his visa to come into the United States. So once he started working, he worked for about a year and a half, and then he petitioned for my mom and my 5 brothers and my sister to come into the U.S. So when we came in, we all came in. We all came in with green cards, which is so. Then for example, my mother became a U.S. citizen within 5 years. She went to school, she became a U.S. citizen. Then my dad became a U.S. citizen. But no one ever told my mom or my dad, because we were all underage. We were all little. I was 11, my brothers were younger. And when my parents became a U.S. citizen, that would have been a good opportunity for my mom to just list her kids and pay, and we would have all become U.S. citizens. What happened was no one ever said that. So what happened was when we became adults, we all had to do ourselves. And so that happens not
All
just
the
with
time.
my family, it's something that happened quite
the time.
often. And a lot of times, like my mom's goal when she came, she thought her goal when she became a U.S. citizen was to petition for her sister. So that was also their goal. And so I think there was a lot of misinformation, miscommunication. So we grow up thinking, because our parents are U.S. citizens, they were all U.S. citizens, and then we come to find out we are not. And that is the misconception. And I also wanted to bring up something that is important for people to understand is that immigration changed, and I know Fred and I talk about this, totally in 1996. Oklahoma bombing occurred. They thought it was a terrorist attack at that time. And what happened is a law was passed called the IRA law. Well, the first portion of the IRA law is illegal, right? So you think it's going to target the undocumented population, right? But then it says non-citizens. Well, legal permanent residents are non-citizens. So that's a perfect example of how a law can pass, and people think that it's going to target the undocumented population, and then they sneak in non-citizens, and now you have everybody that gets into the mix. And so that is something that, and I think that's why many times the population is very divided, because they see all these immigration laws passed, they think it's going to target the undocumented, and actually at the end of the day, it's targeting all the immigrants.
What's interesting,
That's interesting.
When you mention that, these two laws together that were in 96 and 97 completely changed the face of immigration. And an example of how the politicians use this, without going into a lot of detail, there was a horrible result where people who had been convicted 20 or 30 years ago pled guilty to the crime and were not deportable for that crime at that time, would now be automatically deportable without benefit of a hearing. Barney Frank, quite a left-wing Democrat, and I forget the Republican, but a real right-wing Republican, co-sponsored a piece of immigration, of legislation, 2 pages long, to fix that. They called it Fix 96. It flew through the House. It got over to the Senate. They turned it into a 1,500-page bill dealing with the undocumented population rather than the legal permanent resident criminal alien population, and it died. And the law remains in effect to this day because people misdefined and mischaracterized the issue.
And that's interesting because the person that did the bombing was an American citizen
Yeah,
and
that's
was
right,
not
Yeah.
an immigrant, and no talk about even going back and let's look at these laws. And I think the hysteria, just like you said, gets everyone so excited, and we got to do something that's just
It's so easy to take a case, whether it be on somebody who's here illegally who happens to have committed some crimes, or it's easy to find a poster child who says what you want to say, and then blow it up to be the face of the whole immigration problem when there's 20 different issues that have to be really dealt with one at a time.
right. So both Raquel and Helena, I know you both work with youth, And I know you've seen some of these cases where, children believe that they're born here, they don't even speak the language, they have never been to their nation of origin, and then, like you said, something happens, and it might be something that you would consider a misdemeanor or something not deportable, and now all of a sudden you're deported back to the Cape Verde Islands or Portugal or Latin America or a country, and it's just devastating to the family as well as to this person or this child. And I mean, what do you do to help with that? What procedures are in place with the consulate, either in Cape Verde or Portugal, to help individuals that this happens to?
Well, when this started to happen, in '96, they were, especially I'm going to speak about Portugal because I know that Raquel is also very aware of what's happening in Cape Verde. What was happening is they were, the United States were deporting these individuals who grew up in the U.S., who thought they were U.S. citizens, got in trouble. Sometimes the law is retroactive. It's important to mention, even though
the law is retroactive.
The law,
Okay.
it was passed in 1996, it's retroactive.
To how
So
long?
goes
To
back. They can go back
Forever?
Forever.
Yeah,
That's
so
okay.
that
So
is
that's-
something that is important to mention. So what started to happen was they started deporting these individuals who thought they were U.S. citizens, but they were legal permanent residents. They were deporting them to Portugal, and I'm going to use the Azores as an example. So they were United States was just leaving them at the airport. So then the Portuguese government in the Azores, they started saying, who are these homeless? Who are these U.S. citizens who are homeless at the airport? Well, comes to find out, these were basically Portuguese citizens who never became U.S. citizens, who lived in the U.S., and were becoming homeless. So then United States and Portugal, they signed an agreement that basically states that if U.S. is going to deport anybody to Portugal, they have to be issuing travel documents so that at least they will be aware of when they get
what's
there.
going on.
So the Azores, they created an integration,
Yes, the
sort of an
integration.
integration program. So for example, I'll tell you what our role is. We have a protocol with the Portuguese government, which means we go into Bristol County House of Correction. The only House of Correction that we're doing this with is in Bristol County. We go in and we see anyone who's either Portuguese or Cape Verdean who is in the process of being deported, who is a legal permanent resident, who's a green card holder. And first what we try to do is try to get as much as information as we possibly can when we go to the Bristol County House of Correction. And once we get that information, many times we bring Attorney Watt in to see if there's anything that maybe that can be done to vacate certain cases, okay? Because sometimes there's a possibility. So we do that, and then once we gather all that information, and many times there's nothing that can be done. So once we gather that intensive information, like how old were you when you came to the United States? Did you finish high school? Do you have any siblings? All of this extensive information. Why are you being deported? Have you used drugs? It's important to understand that the number one reason for deportation is substance abuse. Number two is domestic violence. And three, assault and battery. So those are the three main reasons. So once we gather all this extensive information, what do? And we find that there is really not much we can do to stop the deportation. All that extensive information is shared, for example, with the Azorean government and the organizations that are there who help them integrate into the Portuguese way of life, which is bizarre because that we do here integrate into the American way. So now they're doing the integration to the way. So exactly. So the Azores has these two integration programs. It's called Novo Dia, which is called a new day, and Risca, which is the social services. So all of this information we share with them, so they'll know when they're arriving. So they'll go pick them up at the airport. And once they get there, there's a psychological evaluation, and they try to provide wraparound services to them, and at the same time, teach them how to speak Portuguese, because a lot of them don't speak the language, and they're totally lost. They don't know anything about it. A lot of them, they've never visited. We have cases that they were like 9 months. And when they came. So there is a total, and for all they believe is that they're Americans. And so that's
how they're seen probably.
That is
there.
exactly.
You're an
They're
American.
known as the American. And so that is what we're doing. And again,
with Keefe too.
We're
It's the
doing
same,
we're
but
doing the same thing with Cape Verde,
it's-
except there's no integration process
Exactly.
like we have in Portugal.
in
And so
Portugal.
that is we deal with the psychological impact in the families too, because it's financially many times they're like some of them are fishermen or construction or roofers. Some of them they might have a drug problem, but they are working and they're helping out with
Helping
the
out with the
families.
family,
So
sure,
when
of
you separate them, what we're finding is because we work with the families that stay. I mean, not only do we know what's going on there, but we also know what's going on here. So this way, there's always this concept
Sure.
of exchanging of information. So we know what happens to the families here. So many times a lot of times Department of Social Services, which is now it's Department of Children and Family, has to get involved with these children because there's a sense of abandonment that these kids feel that no, the father is been taken away from them. So what happens is you see the cycle. Now not only the financial impact, but also the emotional impact it has. These children, these children start misbehaving, and they feel abandoned. So there's all of these psychological problems that happens with these children here. So when I talk about this issue, I always talk. It's not really a U.S. issue. It's not really an immigrant issue. It's also U.S. because then when you're separating these children from their families, then the children are here and the emotional impact that it has on the children. And I'm just going to mention the case that we've worked with about 1,000 of these cases. We had a case that the mother was deported and she left her 5 children with a grandmother to take care of the kids. All of her 5 kids became involved in drugs. So that's just
That's
I mean
the risk.
this is the risk,
situation,
and
yeah.
of course, I mean we're working also with Cape Verde, but right now because there's no really an integration.
No
program. But
integration, and we have a big waiting list, the deportees.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's important that when we talk about this project again, we're talking about legal permanent residence. So if we go into Bristol County and we see someone who's here undocumented and is in the process of being deported, that's not part of what we
Right,
do.
so that's not what you do. Okay. So as part of, Bristol County and advocacy, Michelle, maybe what's the role of the Bristol County Commission? What have they had discussions about this issue of immigration? Have you heard this from some of the groups that you've done and families like you mentioned that now, a parent is gone?
Well, from the Commission's viewpoint, it's our job to try to be a voice for women and to look for issues that specifically affect women. And of course, being separated from your children, is a critical issue that needs to be, spoken to. And unfortunately, the immigration law here doesn't look like it's going to be changed. They had the attempt to do the DREAM Act to pass that. That didn't work out. They weren't able to pass it. And I think with the DREAM Act, if you went to high school here, you came here under the age of 16 as a child.
I think it's basically was going to be what President Obama just did.
Yeah,
with
you were
the
here for 5
DACA.
years. You could kind of, apply to be here, to be recognized. And then you had to wait like another 6 years before you could, but at least it gave you a path to legalization, which is what you were talking about
DACA, what
earlier.
we're finding right now, the DACA is what President Obama basically signed, which is an executive order with DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Well, what DACA basically says, if you've been here to 2007 or below that, if you're at the age between 15 and 30, then there is you can apply for DACA,
yeah.
and of course you can't have any criminal background, all that. So you can apply. But DACA, it's important to understand that DACA never leads to a green card. DACA will never lead to legal permanent residence. So that's important. It's a temporary order for 2 years, and then after 2 years it needs to get renewed. What's important to also understand is if whoever comes in as president, let's just say we get a Republican, he can just take off that executive order.
Exactly.
Take that off.
There
Yeah.
are 2 right now that are pending that he tried to pass, was to extend DACA and DAPA, which is Deferred Action for Parents. And DAPA and DACA basically were appealed. And so right now, if I'm not
Everything
mistaken,
Yeah, that's all
so
held up.
basically it's staggering. So those
So
are
you
the
can't even apply for that right now.
No.
But if
That's
you
right.
have applied in the past, you can renew
You
that.
can
But
still
if right
apply
now
for
you can't,
DACA, but not
You
the
know.
DAPA.
and not the extended DACA or DAPA.
But Elena's right. That all that really is a letter that says
a Band-Aid.
we're not going to deport you today, and until we decide to deport you, you can work, and that's all the DACA is.
So the
Oh,
commissioners
okay.
hearing this,
Okay.
the commissioners have said, obviously, changing immigration law is a huge project.
Absolutely.
But, as we've talked as a group, there needs to be some explanations as to all of these terms and what's really at issue here,
Right.
so that people can understand. So part of the commission's job is to build awareness
Yes,
of issues
absolutely.
that affect women. So that's why we chose immigration, as a topic, because we thought it was critical.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I think, keeping educating, getting
Citizenship.
citizenship, what it is that we need to do for, for that process, and keep explaining the differences and being
difference.
able to speak up. I know it's probably
Exactly.
difficult, especially for you, Fred, when you're probably trying to enjoy a dinner or do something and you're hearing conversations from people and,
Yeah.
and being able to speak up. But I think the more that we can do that and that we can spread the word and we can get
help.
others to keep and join us in that, to understand, the differences between the two, I think are just so important, because I know I've learned a lot just in researching this
Just-
topic and keep talking and keep educating myself about that for the people that we work with, on a daily basis, so we can, do whatever we can, to help them. Because when I look in New Bedford, Fall River, all of Bristol County, we're just so rich and diverse communities that are lovely and that are wonderful, and we shouldn't have to be worried about when they walk through the YWCA door, are they documented, undocumented.
Yes.
We don't care, we don't ask, we provide our services, and we want to help people. And it's it's sad that we have students, or at the high school, at the middle schools that I know you both work with all the time, and
Students.
just it's just dividing our country and dividing
Yeah.
us.
The best thing
And
we
breeding
can.
hate as well.
And exactly, it's another hate. It's another form of
And
hate
that
and
leads to
bigotry
violence
and-
against women.
and discrimination.
Violence
Exactly.
against,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's why it's
Absolutely.
important. Citizenship is huge.
It's
And that's why
huge.
one of the projects we're doing at the school, and we've been doing this for many, many years, is actually going into the high school and start educating these immigrant kids who are legal permanent residents the importance of becoming U.S. citizens. Because once they turn 18 and they've been here for 5 years, they can apply for citizenship. So education is power. So going in, and we go in there, we speak to about 300 and something students. We're there for 2 days and during the classrooms, and just go in there and educate. First of all, not to get in trouble, not to get in any fights. They're just because
Exactly.
if they might get into if they get into a fight in school, they're legal. They are not U.S. citizens. So it's I think education about not getting into trouble, the importance of becoming U.S. citizens, the benefits of becoming U.S. citizens,
Exactly, the
and
benefits.
all of that. So I think that
good.
because one of the things when we started talking about the deportation issue, I kept hearing over and over again was no one ever told me about citizenship. No, I thought I was a U.S. citizen, and they thought I was legal permanent resident, that I was protected by the immigration laws. That was a wake-up call to a lot of people. And so I think the more education we can possibly, for them not to get in trouble and to start the path for citizenship if they qualify, of course.
Right.
That's one of the things we've been doing at the high schools. And that's why I always find that when you're working with immigrant youth at risk, because I think all immigrant youth that are out in schools are at risk.
Right.
So I think that is so important that I always talk about, even with the ELL, okay? English language learners, my focus is immigrant youth, because that is a difference. Because when we talk about ELL, of course, children from Puerto Rico also become ELL students. But people from Puerto Rico do not have an immigration challenge.
They're citizens.
And they are
They are
U.S.
citizens.
citizens. And that is important that when I talk about ELL, I specify immigrant students because that is where they are at risk, especially if they're in the school. So when I talk about immigrant youth at risk, I'm talking about the kids who are not U.S. citizens. And I think that is something that I'm always very worried about because of what I do. And I think it's important
In the schools.
in the schools.
Which is very important.
No, and we know that it's difficult. I'm sure it's a very long and complicated, it can be daunting process. So I think having someone like both your organizations and Fred to navigate that system, to go through it, is important, because like you said, nobody ever told me, or I didn't know, and something about not getting into a fight at school, which we don't want that to happen anyway, but for something like that, and then to be deported
and we
because
talk
you
about
got into a
getting-
fight with someone
Exactly.
is just seems like just such a waste of their life, and you can never come back. Is that correct?
Yes,
Once you're
exactly,
deported,
yeah.
As a practical
as a
matter,
practical
yeah.
in theory anyway, you can never come back. So it's just it's just a process that we know that we need advocacy, we need legislation, to change that, because as I said when we started, that this is a nation built on immigrants, and we need to embrace that, and we need to help everyone that's here legally to move in that direction, and hopefully not take so long, because it just seems like it just takes such a long process. But as we wrap up and get to a final words, and maybe just go final thoughts. I know Immigrants Assistance Center and Keefe Association are doing great things, in our community. If you wanted to give final thoughts, you have stuff coming up that you want to tell us about?
Sure, I'd love to. Our Immigrants Assistance Center, we are celebrating our 45th anniversary. So we're having a 45th anniversary celebration on April 8th from 6 to 10 at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And so we're very, very excited. So if anybody's interested and wants to call the Immigrants Assistance Center and purchase tickets, or they can go on immigrantsassistancecenter.org and purchase tickets online, or call the Immigrants Assistance Center at 508-996-8113. Again, 508-996-8113. Our offices are open every day from 8:30 till 4:30, Monday through Friday. Thank you.
Great. Check that out. Raquel, what's going on with Keefe Association?
Keefe Association, last week we have our election for Keefe. Was a way to bring awareness to the people like the immigration issue, because we thought it was very important. Was 2 days, was beautiful. We was on the news. We won after 17 years with one party. Now we have a different party. We expect to be better. And about Keefe Association New Bedford, we're gonna have a program with you, Gail, in charter school for the kids on Easter.
April vacation, April 19th.
April 19th. It's for all the students, 5 grade to 8th grade. We will allow everybody who has the children wants to participate. It's 1 day. It's going to be fun. It's all free. We have Immigrants Assistant who we told her, now she knows. And we have our event for October. It's a gala. And for me, it's the best party in New Bedford.
Second to the best party.
Great party.
Don't worry, because we work together.
Great parties. Both have great parties.
We collaborate.
Yes.
We're partners.
And I'm a part of the board, Immigrants Assistant. We've been working together for so many years, many years.
No, that's great. Collaboration is great.
Thank you, Gail, for this program.
Yes.
It's a beautiful program, and I hope with this program brings more issue like this, the immigration, to the public who is not aware of. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Fred, any final thoughts?
Well, we don't have any upcoming events. Can't talk about that.
Attorneys don't have any fun.
But thank you. This is really, really good. And I hope that people, before they jump in on the issue one way or the other, I hope they'll take the time to learn just a little bit about the issues and understand that each one has its own flavor. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about that a little.
Great. Michelle, any thoughts?
My final thoughts would be that you call Congress, call your senator, express your opinion, ask them to pass immigration reform. A lot of people are getting hurt, and we need to protect people. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you all again for being with us here today, and thank you for watching Voice of South Coast Women.